Joining me now is Kellyanne Conway, former senior counselor to President Trump and author of Here's the Deal. Also, Dinesh D'Souza, conservative commentator, host of the Dinesh D'Souza podcast. Kellyanne, Biden once again, following in the great tradition of his old boss, openly trashing America on the world stage with his depiction, of course, and hearkening back to Charlottesville and making his, points about January 6th. Your reaction tonight?
Reaction is we're neither feared nor respected around the globe, including at NATO in front of our allies. This is the time to reassure our allies and allay the fears of many Americans, Laura and Dinesh, who are feeling the pain at the pump, feeling the pain in the grocery store, and feeling the pain when they see the vice president 2 times go to Europe, followed by her boss, the president, go to Europe, and engage in what can only fairly be seen as America Last policy here and abroad. It's one thing to castigate and denigrate Americans here at home to make us less dependent on our own resources for energy independence. It's quite another to go and do that in front of probably a salivating few countries at NATO, happy to see a United States president who's not going to put America first and says as much. And not only is Putin watching, and Iran and China and the rest of the world, but our military, our active military, our veterans, our military spouses also hear an American president say and do that. If you look back to the 2020 presidential debates, foreign policy questions were conspicuous by their absence. Particularly in one of those debates, people were afraid to raise it, frankly. So we didn't hear enough from this man who had been in Washington, D.C. for 50 years. But 2 quick polling numbers as well to build on what you said. Number one, in the AP NRC poll, 56% said they think that Biden has not been strong enough in his response on Ukraine. That includes 43% of Democrats, 68% of Republicans, 64% of independents. Only 6% of Americans say he's been too strong. And finally, 74% of Americans say they don't have faith. They have a low level of confidence for Biden to handle a crisis. That means a crisis of any type. So you see in there, I have something, I'm going to make a serious point. It's not a partisan point, it's a serious point. I would prefer that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris not go to these forums anymore. I I think it makes us look weak. That. And
Dinesh, I got to get Dinesh in on this, Kellyanne. I got to get Dinesh in on this. Dinesh, to see Biden go to Europe is to see American weakness on display. How debilitating is that to America's, respect and prestige around the world? And it certainly doesn't help them at home. So I don't know why they keep sending him.
Well, they don't really have much of a choice, and the Europeans are in a very odd situation. In some ways, there's a part of them that wants and yearns for and demands American leadership. And so that part of them is disappointed in having this stumbling, mumbling figure who is supposedly the leader of the free world and is actually embarrassing the free world in front of the world. Now, here in America, the embarrassment of Biden is somewhat camouflaged by the thick fog of rhetoric put out by the media, which in a sense is constantly cloaking and supporting Biden. But you don't have that. In the rest of the world, they just see a kind of naked Biden who absolutely seems intellectually incoherent, seems to have no sense of what the interests of other countries are, keeps making absurd statements like, oh, there's a division between the democracies and the autocracies of the world. Think of the largest democracy in the world, India. Now, here's India that buys a lot of Russian oil. It's a developing country that needs that oil in order to grow economically. India doesn't really care about the Ukraine. And so India says, we're going to keep buying the oil. So here's a democracy bigger than the United States in terms of population that's not on our side on this. You think Biden would need to address something like this, but he doesn't. He just pretends like India doesn't exist. Oh, the democracies in the world. So you just have this sing-song routine while the world looks on in disbelief and contempt.
Well, Kellyanne, there was progress today, though. We have to admit this, because Biden acknowledged that his sanctions are causing hardship. Watch.
Right.
With regard to food shortage, yes, we did talk about food shortages. And it's going to be real. The price of these sanctions is not just imposed upon Russia. It's imposed upon an awful lot of countries as well, including European countries and our country as well.
Kellyanne, we thought Carter's malaise speech was bad. This is a heck of a midterm message. It's going to cost you $150 to fill up your tank. And we're going to get 100,000 refugees, billions out the door, and food shortages. Vote Democrat 2022. What a nightmare message.
There's nothing like it. There's nothing like, that's right. There's nothing like an uninspiring commander-in-chief to go abroad and deliver that message. Also, speaking of sanctions, he seems to be the only guy in his administration, in his inner circle, who says that they don't work, that they were never meant to deter. His Secretary of State, his National Security Advisor, his Vice President, and today, basically his press secretary, said that they are meant to deter. They do have a deterrent effect. But he says, look, man, you know, don't joke around with me. I always said that they wouldn't deter. So even on the simplest meaning of the purpose of sanctions, he cannot agree with his inner circle. But projecting to us back at home that food is going to continue to be expensive and then in short supply is really not the bomb we needed. I think the next time he feels like going abroad and embarrassing us, he should take his first trip in quite a while, if ever, to the southern border. Certainly his first trip as president.
Dinesh, think about what that message says to, I try to think of like middle-class family, kind of family I grew up in. As Kellyanne said, here's that message today from a sitting U.S. president. They already feel the gas pump pain. Now they're being told there might not be food. I just want to drive this point home to the American public. I have never heard a U.S. president speak in these terms, ever. Ever. It's gonna drive people to the store to stock up and hoard food at this point. I wouldn't be surprised.
I mean, I think that if one is going to make the case that a president who is supposed to act on behalf of and in the interests of the American people is going to take steps that impose this kind of hardship in ordinary life. I mean, think about a guy who makes $15 an hour and it costs him $100 to fill up your SUV. That's 1 day's salary out of 5 going just to fill up your tank. And Biden is doing that to you. And now you think that he'd say, well, this is why it is in our vital national interest that we do this. This isn't just in Ukraine's interest. It is vital for America that we intervene here. It's vital for America. But there's not even any attempt to show that, to make that case. There's just this kind of blind rhetoric, oh, Putin is like Hitler and so on, and people are just supposed to salute and go along. But I think the ordinary American is wondering, what is it that justifies this high degree of sacrifice that our leaders, who, by the way, don't face the pain themselves, are imposing on the rest of us?
Yeah, I guess a horrible, rotten, racist country that his party thinks we are. I mean, they're just going to have to suffer and suffer and suffer for all their foreign policy mistakes. Kellyanne, I have to get to this moment from Biden when he tried to tell the world that he was really firm with China when it came to Ukraine. Watch.
I had a very straightforward conversation with Xi. I made no threats, but I made it clear to him that make sure he understood the consequences of him helping Russia. China understands that its economic future is much more closely tied to the West than it is to Russia. And so I'm hopeful that he does not get engaged.
Kellyanne, shouldn't we see the transcript? Who buys this?
Well, we should see the full transcript. In fact, China put out their version, Laura, within 20 minutes. We're yet to see the full transcript. I'm sure President Xi is convinced, and I'm sure President Putin is. Look, China has already benefited from the Biden presidency. He won't hold them to account on fentanyl, which is the #1 killer of 18 to 44-year-olds in this country right now as we sit here. He doesn't hold them to account for their persecution of the Uyghurs. He doesn't hold them to account for the virus. He doesn't hold them to account for the $85 billion of American equipment and intelligence that is within China's wingspan that Biden left behind when he allowed the Taliban to take Kabul and the 13 service members to perish, not listening to his, quote, generals. So I don't believe Biden when he says he'll stick it to China. He knows that Hunter Biden's done very well there. He's not going to take on President Xi. And if we don't believe, if the polls here in this country don't show credibility and competence vis-a-vis our own president, you can't expect the rest of the world, particularly someone like President Xi, to feel that way.
Yeah, Xi and Putin, or at least Xi, is laughing, and that's sad for America. Kellyanne and Dinesh, thank you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.